Senator Tom Coburn, who was Roscoe Filburn?
Roscoe Filburn. Let's see, I'm trying to recall.
The case from the 1940s, the Commerce Clause?
Oh, sure. Roscoe was a chicken farmer and also a wheat farmer. And Roscoe sued the federal government when they told him that he could not raise the adequate amount of wheat that he wanted to, because the government had decided they were going to control wheat plantings. And what he said was, okay, but I can raise wheat for my chickens. And he took it all the way to the Supreme Court and lost that battle.
Why do you recount that story in the debt bomb?
Because it's a great example on the enumerated powers and what the unwinding, why do we find ourselves in the place we're in now? How did we get here? What do we do about it? And what are the ramifications? The greatest way for the government to make something expensive is for the government to make it affordable. And all you have to do is look at the programs. What were the average inflationary costs of health care before we created Medicare and Medicaid? They ran the same as every other aspect of our inflation. In other words, there was no differential between health care costs. Now that we have a government program, what has happened is health care costs are 2, sometimes 3 times the rate of the average inflation in the economy. So what you did is, number one, is you had a Supreme Court ruling that it was in the best interest of the country to take away the liberty of individuals. And the Congress had actually gone outside of the enumerated powers, which lists very specifically what the Congress can do. And yet, the Supreme Court held up the abandonment of the enumerated powers and also the trumping of the 10th Amendment.
Why, when it comes to the Commerce Clause, you used that with Elena Kagan, Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan, in her testimony. And you reprint that testimony, your back and forth with Elena Kagan in the debt bomb. What was the question you asked her about fruits and vegetables?
Well, the question I ask is, could the government tell you, mandate to you, how many fruits and vegetables you would eat a day? And it really arises is, where's the role for the government in terms of our lives? Can, in fact, the Commerce Clause be viewed so widely as what was done in Filburn versus the United States? Can it be interpreted so widely that we could eventually get to the point where we can mandate? Well, we're doing it. We're doing it right now, matter of fact, because the new rules from the United States Department of Agriculture to the schools on terms of what they'll feed in the school lunch program, we're having an uprising across the country because of the rejection of what the government is saying, here's what you have to eat. Here's what's available. So the point is our founders knew that for true liberty and freedom to be there had to be personal responsibility. And when the government goes beyond the level of which a prudent exercise of government, I'm not against government, but I recognize there's limitations in terms of what the government can do. But the limitation is based on what we can do well. And as you look at what we're doing, matter of fact, the debt bomb exposes that, the Back in Black that we put out, and the oversight that we've done over the last 8 years shows where we're not doing it well. And so the idea is to raise that question in the consciousness of the readers of the book. What did our founders say about the Commerce and General Welfare Clause? They described it, if you read the Federalist Papers, a very, very limited Commerce Clause involvement of the federal government, a very, very limited expose of what the General Welfare Clause would be. We've taken those terms, pardon me, and markedly expanded them beyond what our founders intended, and the result of that has been a diminution of our liberties and freedoms. I mean, if you go to school and you're buying lunch at school, and the USDA out of Washington is telling you what you can eat and what you can't eat, rather than your parents and local school board, I would say a considerable amount of freedom of the parents and also of the children and the school administrators has been taken away and moved to Washington.
But what about the common good? Wouldn't it be good to have less obesity, et
Sure,
cetera?
everybody's for less obesity, but do you think we can mandate less obesity by government regulation? What that does is ignore the idea that there's personal responsibility and personal accountability. You know, we're going to talk about The Tragedy of American Compassion, a book later on in this segment, written by Marvin Lasky. And the whole assumption is that can you have freedom and grow that freedom and liberty without personal responsibility and personal accountability, undermining. And so there's a balance there. And my opinion, having lived almost 65 years and seen what my freedom and my responsibility was when I was a young man versus what we've transferred to the federal government, I think is very, very dangerous for the ultimate freedom of our country. And history would put that forward, is if you look back on the history of republics, the same thing's happening to us that's happened to every other republic. As the government has grown, the freedom has become diminished.
Senator Coburn, you write in The Debt Bomb, our government today is so massive that it is impossible for any one member of Congress to know everything. As a result, members have become highly dependent on staff, lobbyists, and interests who are all too eager to label their obedience and ignorance as purity to whatever cause the interest group champions.
Yeah, our motivations are too, actually expand that a little bit, our motivations are too often as members of Congress is how do we please those people who will enable us to stay here?
What's careerism?
Careerism is looking at the next election to a greater and stronger point than looking at your oath of office and how you do what is best for the country in the long term, regardless of how it affects your political career.
Is careerism, in your view, a form of corruption?
No, I don't think it's corruption. I think it's natural human nature. The people of Congress are great people, by and far. Well-intentioned. They love our country. They want what is best for the country, provided they can still have a say in it. And so you get the natural tension of, do I do what's best for the country, even though it hurts my political career? And those are pretty tough decisions, and only very courageous people will do that routinely. You know, when your desire is for position and power, and the original desire was well-intentioned and well-meaning, and you confuse or rationalize that position against standing outside of that and looking, if I was not partisan, if I was not in a political position, what would be the best position for the country? And those two get conflicted because of our desire for position and power or a political career. So I'm not critical. I think public service is a wonderful thing. But we've transitioned in our country too often, especially in the Senate, to people who have very limited exposure to the real world outside of the political realm. And that's very different than what we had the first 100 years in our country's history. Most of the people had broad ranges of experience in the private sector and in other areas of life, and brought that information, experience, wisdom, gray hair to solve the problems of the country. And that's more limited now. I hardly will ever vote for somebody that's a career politician. You know, and the reason is I understand, as a physician, I know human nature. I see it. I see the consequence. I see both the positives and the negatives of it. But I also have gotten to see as a senator, and I saw some as a member of Congress, because I wrote on this in breach of trust.